They called it the Great Harmony, a gift from the stars bestowed upon the fractured, warring tribes of Earth. We didn't see the ships at first, not the way the old stories predicted. There was no fire, no blinding light, just a quiet shift in the fabric of reality. One day, we were on the brink of self-annihilation, our air thick with the ash of the last wars, and the next. There was peace. The skies cleared, the radiation faded, and the architects arrived, their forms like liquid silver, their voices a symphony of calming frequencies that soothed the rage in our bones. They offered us a place in the confluence, a galactic collective of 1,000 species, all living in unified purpose. All we had to do was let go of the pain, of the chaotic, violent history that had led us to ruin. We had to harmonize. It was a gentle process, they assured us, a biological and psychological recalibration to purge the baser, destructive instincts that defined our species. In return, we received longevity, knowledge, and a galaxy of wonders, humanity. What was left of it? Signed the accord without a second thought. It was the easiest decision we ever made. We traded our soul for a gilded cage and called it salvation. I was born into this new world, a child of the harmony. My name is Kalen, and for 30 standard cycles, I was a model citizen, a testament to the Confluence's success. I served as a liaison in the diplomatic corps on Cygnus X-1, the heart of the Architect's dominion, a city world of impossible spires and serene energy fields. My work involved processing the integration of newly contacted species, guiding them through the same peaceful transition humanity had undergone. I believed in the mission. I saw the vibrant, thriving cultures around me, the stoic, crystalline core, the gaseous, philosophical lumina, all living without conflict, their histories archived and their futures intertwined. Earth's chaotic past, the one I learn about in sanitized historical archives, seemed like a barbaric nightmare we were lucky to have escaped. The emotions they described, unfettered rage, jealousy, defiant love, were alien concepts, smoothed over in my own mind by the harmony's gentle touch. We were better now, calm, logical, and productive. My sister, Ilara, was the embodiment of this new humanity. She was an artist, but her art wasn't born of torment or passion. It was a reflection of the Confluence's perfect geometry, intricate patterns of light and sound that were beautiful in their precision, but held no echo of a human heart. She was chosen for the final harmonization, the ultimate expression of unity, a process where a being's consciousness was said to merge fully with the Confluence's collective. It was the greatest honor a citizen could receive, a transition into a state of being we couldn't comprehend but were taught to revere. I stood in the grand chamber of ascension, my heart swelling with a programmed sense of pride as Ilara stepped into the shimmering cascade of light. The architects around us hummed their approval, their silver forms rippling with serene energy. I watched her face, expecting to see transcendence, bliss, the peace that passes all understanding. Instead, for a fraction of a second, I saw something else. It was an emotion I had no name for, a flicker of raw, primal terror that broke through the placid mask of harmony. Then it was gone, and she was gone, her body collapsing into the light. When they brought her out, she was perfect. Her skin was flawless. Her eyes held the depth of a starfield, but there was nothing behind them. The being they presented to us was a beautiful, hollow shell, an echo of my sister in form alone. The architects called it a metabolic misfire, a one-in-a-trillion tragedy. They were compassionate, their voices resonating with programmed sympathy as they recommended her physical form for bioarchival. I nodded, I agreed. I performed the rituals of sanitized grief, but the image of her face, that fleeting moment of sheer terror, had planted a seed of dissonance in my perfectly harmonized mind. That seed began to grow in the silent hours of the Signan night. Grief was an inefficient emotion, a relic of old Earth, yet I found myself crippled by it. I started looking for answers, a logical explanation for the illogical fear in my sister's eyes. Using my clearance as a liaison, I began to slip past the surface layers of the Confluence's public archives and into the deeper, more restricted currents of their data streams. I searched for other misfires, other tragedies. I found them, thousands of them, across hundreds of species, all filed under the same euphemistic classifications: metabolic misfire, synaptic overload, consciousness dissolution. The deeper I dug, the darker the truth became. I found fragmented reports, heavily redacted, that spoke not of harmonization, but of a protocol codenamed the silencing. It was a final solution for species that proved too resistant, their cultural identities too stubborn to be gently smoothed away. The final harmonization wasn't a union, it was an extraction. The Confluence was harvesting the memories, experiences, and unique biological data of a species, then wiping the consciousness clean, leaving behind a docile, empty vessel for study before eventual disposal. We weren't partners in a galactic collective, we were a crop, and the harvest was nearly complete. My search did not go unnoticed, but the alert it triggered wasn't from the architects. It came from a ghost signal, a whisper in the machine that bypassed all Confluence security. A message appeared on my private console, a string of corrupted code that resolved into a single, terrifying word from a dead language: remember. Following a breadcrumb trail of untraceable data packets, I found them. Or rather, they found me. They called themselves the Dissonance, a hidden network of humans who had evaded the harmony. Some were descendants of the few who fled when the architects arrived. Others were anomalies like me, individuals whose harmonization had fractured, allowing the old, chaotic emotions to seep back in. They found me in a forgotten maintenance conduit deep in the underbelly of the capital. Their leader was a woman whose face was a road map of pain, her left eye replaced by a dulled, salvaged optic. She didn't give me a name, only a call sign: Echo. She didn't speak with the calming, melodic tones of the harmonized. Her voice was rough, raw, and filled with a fire I hadn't heard in my entire life. She didn't show me redacted files or encrypted reports. She showed me the truth on a flickering, salvaged screen. She played unfiltered archives from old Earth. I saw a world I never knew existed, a world of breathtaking chaos. I saw paintings that wept with color, heard music that soared with joy and raged with sorrow. I saw people dancing, fighting, crying, laughing. I saw love, fierce and possessive. I saw hatred, ugly and destructive. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was us. And then she showed me the last wars. The footage was different from the sanitized version in the official archives. It was disjointed, the attacks precise, almost surgical. The weapons used didn't match any known human technology. Echo explained that the wars weren't our fault. The Confluence had orchestrated our collapse, pushing us to the brink, shattering our world so that when they arrived as saviors, we would welcome them with open arms, desperate for their peace, willing to give up anything to escape the hell they had secretly built for us. Echo looked at me, her single organic eye burning with an intensity that stripped away the layers of my conditioning. They don't just erase our memories. Liaison, she said, her voice a low growl. They steal our history, hollow out our souls, and hang our empty skins in their museums. They've turned our species into a ghost, and you've been helping them arrange the funeral. She offered me a choice. I could return to my life of comfortable ignorance, to my gilded cage, and wait for the day my own final harmonization was scheduled. Or I could join them. They were hopelessly outmatched, a handful of ghosts rattling their chains in the heart of an empire. But they had a plan, a desperate, impossible gamble to awaken humanity from its long slumber. They needed my access, my understanding of the architect's systems, my position within the belly of the beast. They needed a traitor. I thought of Ilara, not the empty shell in the bio-archive, but the vibrant girl who, just for a moment, remembered what it was to be afraid, to be human. The calculated, serene logic of the harmony battled with the raw, unfamiliar agony of her loss. The grief was no longer a flaw. It was a weapon. The rage I felt was not a destructive impulse. It was the clarion call of a forgotten people. I looked at the scarred face of Echo, at the ghosts of old Earth flickering on the screen behind her. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly awake. That night, I returned to my sterile, silent apartment and sent a single, encrypted message into the Ghost network, a message that would sign the death warrant of the man I used to be. They took her memory, I wrote, my fingers trembling with a newfound purpose. I will take their future. The great, peaceful harmony was a lie, and I was going to make the galaxy burn with the truth. Becoming a traitor was a silent, internal process. On the surface, I was unchanged. I still walked the gleaming corridors of the diplomatic corps with the same placid grace, my voice modulated to the perfect, soothing frequency of a harmonized official. I processed the integration reports of the newly consented species from the Perseus arm, their cultures being neatly cataloged and their destabilizing histories archived for study. I smiled my serene, empty smile at the silver-skinned architects who glided past, their very presence a constant, low-frequency hum that was meant to reassure, but now felt like the vibration of a spider's web. But beneath that placid surface, a war was raging. The raw, unfamiliar emotions awakened by Ilara's death were a constant storm. Grief was a physical weight in my chest, a cold, heavy thing that stole my breath in the silent hours. Anger was a white-hot current that made my fingers twitch, a primal urge to shatter the perfect crystalline structures around me. And fear, a cold sweat on my skin, was my constant companion. The fear of discovery, the fear of failure, the fear that the fragile, emerging sense of self would be snuffed out by the all-encompassing peace of the harmony. My life became a performance, each day a new act in a play only I was aware of. I learned to channel the storm, to use the harmony's own conditioning against it. When an architect's psionic probe brushed against my consciousness during a debriefing, a casual test for emotional dissonance, I would focus on the hollow ache where my sister's memory should be, and the probe would register it as the approved sanitized grief of a metabolic misfire, a perfectly acceptable emotional echo. I was a ghost in their machine, and the Dissonance hideout was the only place I was truly alive. It was a forgotten geothermal vent station in the deepest levels of the city, a place of hissing pipes, dripping condensation, and the rich, organic smell of reclaimed soil and recycled air. It was everything in the architect's world was not chaotic, imperfect, and intensely human. Echo's small band of rebels was a collection of broken things, each one a testament to the lie of the harmony. There was Orcs, a data scourge whose family had been among the first generation to be harmonized. He was a wiry, nervous man who spoke in clipped, cynical bursts, his fingers perpetually dancing over the keys of a salvaged console cobbled together from a dozen different species tech. He was the ghost's voice, the one who could navigate the Confluence's data streams, who had found me, and who kept them all hidden. Then there was Lena, the Keeper, an old woman with eyes that held the ghosts of a world she had only ever seen in salvaged data files. She'd been born on a dissonant freighter, a child of the diaspora who fled Earth. She was their historian, their conscience, the curator of a library of forbidden things books with brittle, paper pages, music stored on magnetic tape, and hololiths of unfiltered human art. She was the one who taught me the names for the feelings that warred within me, who showed me the difference between the brutal beauty of tragedy and the sterile emptiness of loss. They were a pathetic, desperate little army, a handful of sparks against an endless night. And they were the last hope of our species. Their plan, as Echo and Jorik laid it out for me on a flickering tactical display, was as insane as it was brilliant. They called it the Dissonance Cascade. A frontal assault was impossible. They didn't have the weapons or the numbers to fight a war. But the architect's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness, the harmony itself. It was a network, a psychological and biological network that connected every harmonized being to the confluence, and through it, to the architects. It was a constant, subtle stream of data that regulated emotions, suppressed traumatic memories, and reinforced the logic of collective peace. The Dissonance Cascade wasn't a virus meant to destroy the network. It was a counter-frequency, a signal designed to corrupt it with the one thing it was built to eliminate the truth of human experience. "We can't outfight them," Jorik explained, his eyes wild with a manic energy as he manipulated the holographic map. "But we can make them remember. We can flood that network with everything they've forced us to forget. The art, the music, the wars, the love, the rage. A tidal wave of pure, chaotic humanity. For most, the shock will be disorienting. It might shatter their conditioning. But for some, a precious few, it might wake them up. It won't be a revolution of armies, Kalen. It will be a revolution of the self. A million tiny rebellions firing off inside a million minds at once. My role was terrifyingly simple. The signal had to be injected at a central nexus, a point where the raw consciousness data of entire populations was processed. And the most significant nexus on Cygnus X1 was located directly beneath my feet, the Spire of Concordance, the heart of the diplomatic core. It was the data processing core where the minds of new species were analyzed, their destabilizing elements identified and tagged for harmonization. It was the place where my sister's essence and countless others had been stripped away and archived. I was the only one with the clearance to get close enough to its primary conduit. I was to be the needle that delivered the poison. The poison was Lena's life's work. She called it the memory core. It wasn't a weapon of code. It was an archive of souls for days. In the humid warmth of the geothermal vent, she guided me through it. It was a data packet of staggering density and containing thousands of unfiltered experiences. I listened to a symphony so full of defiant joy that it made my teeth ache. I read the last letter of a soldier from the old world, his words of love for his family a stark, beautiful counterpoint to the horror he described. I watched a holovid of a mother singing her child to sleep. A simple, unadorned moment of such profound tenderness that it broke through the last of my harmonized detachment and left me weeping. The raw, unfamiliar salt of tears stinging my cheeks. Lena placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch frail but firm. "This is what they fear, Kaylin," she whispered, her voice thick with reverence. "Not our weapons. This the beautiful, terrible, illogical mess of being human. This is what you will give back to them." The first phase of the plan required me to plant a passive scanner on the primary conduit of the Spire of Concordance. Jorik's device was a marvel of scavenged engineering, a sliver of crystalline circuitry no bigger than my thumbnail, designed to map the Spire's data flow and identify the precise millisecond of vulnerability during its daily diagnostic cycle when we could upload the memory core undetected. Getting to the conduit meant accessing a sub-level maintenance shaft, a restricted area even for most of the diplomatic corps. My official reason, logged and approved, was a diagnostic check on the atmospheric regulators, a mundane task that would grant me a 20-minute window. The days leading up to the attempt were a masterclass in deception. The pressure was immense, and the cracks in my performance began to show, not as outbursts, but as an absence. I grew quieter, more withdrawn. This change did not go unnoticed. My closest colleague, a tall, serene diplomat named Lyran, began to watch me with an expression of gentle concern. Lyran was the perfect product of the harmony, logical, compassionate in a detached, clinical way, and utterly devoted to the confluence. He and I had been through integration training together, and he still considered me a friend. "Your emotional echoes surrounding the loss of your sister are persistent, Kaylin," he said one cycle, his voice a soft, melodic hum. "The grief is degrading your efficiency. Perhaps you should request a synaptic recalibration. It is a simple, painless procedure." He was offering me a lobotomy as a kindness, and I had to smile my serene, empty smile and thank him for his concern, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. His watchful, caring eyes became another threat I had to navigate. The day of the mission, my heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, chaotic rhythm that felt like a rebellion in itself. I descended into the maintenance levels, the polished, silent corridors of the upper world giving way to the low hum of machinery and the stark, functional design of the Spire's guts. I found the access panel to the conduit shaft, my fingers slick with a cold sweat as I keyed in my authorization. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow, dark space crisscrossed with glowing plasma conduits and thick bundles of fiber optic cables. The primary conduit was a pulsating, iridescent pillar in the center of the shaft, the lifeblood of the entire spire. I had just attached Jorik's scanner to its surface, the tiny device clinging like a metallic insect, when a soft chime announced the opening of the shaft's entrance behind me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Lyran stood there, his silver robes shimmering in the glow of the conduits, his head tilted with that same look of gentle, infuriating concern. Kalen, the atmospheric regulators are 3 levels above. Your authorization logs you here. Is there an issue? Time seemed to slow down. My mind, once a placid pool, was now a raging torrent. The old, harmonized logic screamed that I should surrender, confess, accept recalibration. But Ilara's face, twisted in that final moment of terror, flashed in my mind's eye. The sound of the symphony, the soldier's last words, the mother's lullaby, they were all there. A chorus of defiance. I turned to face him, forcing my features into a mask of calm professionalism. I channeled the very emptiness I was fighting against, becoming the perfect diplomat once more. "Lyran," I said, my voice smooth as polished stone. I detected a micro-fluctuation in the energy readings during the last archival cycle. It was minor, within acceptable parameters. But I traced the resonance signature here. I thought it best to perform a direct integrity check to prevent any potential data corruption. It seems to have been a sensor ghost. I gestured to the conduit with a steady hand. "Everything is stable. Chew." It was a perfect lie, woven from the truth of my duties and the technical jargon of our work. It was a lie he was programmed to accept. He studied my face for a long moment, his psionic senses brushing against my mind. I focused on the technical specifications of the conduit, flooding my consciousness with data, giving him nothing but the calm, logical thoughts of a diligent official. Finally, he nodded, the concern in his eyes replaced by approval. "Your diligence is commendable, Kalen. See that you file a full report on the sensor ghost." He turned and left, the panel hissing shut behind him, leaving me alone in the humming darkness. I leaned against the wall, my legs trembling, my body shaking with the adrenaline of the near miss. I had faced my past, my friend, the man I used to be, and I had used the enemy's own tools to defeat him. The scanner was in place. The first piece of the plan had succeeded. As I ascended back to the gleaming, sterile world above, I knew that the bridge to my old life had been burned. I wasn't just a grieving brother anymore. I was a saboteur, a liar, and the carrier of a memory that could either save my species or shatter a galaxy. With the scanner in place, the waiting began, and it was a unique form of torture. For 3 agonizing cycles, I lived a double life in its purest form, each moment a tightrope walk over an abyss of discovery. By day, I was Kalen, the diligent diplomatic liaison, my performance now honed to a razor's edge by the encounter with Lyran. I filed my false report on the sensor ghost, filling it with meticulously fabricated data that Jorik fed me from the geothermal vent. My report was so thorough, so perfectly aligned with Confluence protocols, that I received a commendation for my initiative. I sat in meetings with architects, discussing the humane and efficient integration of a silicon-based species from the Kepler belt. My face a mask of serene agreement, while my mind raced with escape routes and contingency plans. Lyran's suspicions seemed to have been allayed. He treated me with a renewed sense of collegial respect, occasionally remarking that my grief echoes seemed to have stabilized. I was a model of harmonized recovery, a success story in the making, and the irony was a bitter is constant taste. But by night, I was a ghost, slipping through forgotten service tunnels and data conduits to the Dissonance hideout. The vent station became my only reality. the humid air and the scent of real soil a balm to my fractured senses. There, we watched the data stream from Jorik's scanner, a river of light on his salvaged console. It was the collective subconscious of the Spire, the raw, uncensored thoughts and memories of thousands of beings being processed and sanitized. Watching it was a horrifying education. I saw the vibrant, chaotic memories of the Keplerian species being systematically dismantled, their fierce tribal loyalties and rich oral traditions tagged as primitive aggression and informational chaos, before being archived and replaced with the placid, logical tenets of the confluence. It was a digital lobotomy on a civilizational scale, and I was watching it happen in real time. Each night, the weight of our task grew heavier. We weren't just fighting for humanity, we were fighting for the very concept of identity, for the right of a species to be beautifully, terribly, imperfectly itself. During this time, Lena became my anchor, while Jorik was a whirlwind of frantic energy and Echo was a tightly coiled spring of cold fury. Lena was the calm at the center of our storm. She saw the toll the deception was taking on me, the way my hands trembled when I thought no one was looking, the dark circles that even my harmonized physiology couldn't completely erase. She didn't offer platitudes or tactical advice. Instead, she shared stories. She told me of old Earth's heroes, not the sanitized generals in the Confluence archives, but flawed, passionate people who made terrible mistakes in the name of love or justice. She showed me art that was born from madness, music from despair, stories of redemption that felt more real and more powerful than 1,000 cycles of perfect, passionless harmony. They think emotion is a weakness, a sickness to be cured, she said one night, her voice a soft, raspy whisper as we watched a flickering hololith of a Terran ballet dancer. But it is our greatest strength. Kalen, it is the engine of our will. Do not be afraid of the storm inside you. Learn to steer it. The moment we had been waiting for arrived on the third cycle. Jorik, his face pale and beaded with sweat in the glow of the console, suddenly let out a strangled gasp. I have it. The diagnostic cycle. There's a window, 0.07 seconds, where the primary archival system purges its cache and recalibrates. During that window, the security protocols drop. It's not a flaw. It's designed that way. An act of supreme arrogance. They don't believe anything could possibly get inside to exploit it. He looked at me, his manic energy replaced by a stark, terrifying gravity. That's our shot. One chance to upload the memory core. If we miss it, or if the upload is incomplete, the system will not only purge it, but will trace the signal's origin point back to the source. It will lead them right to us and to you. The plan for the upload was far more dangerous than planting the scanner. I couldn't simply access a maintenance shaft. The memory core was too dense. It had to be uploaded via a direct physical connection to a high bandwidth data port, and the only ones with enough throughput were in the Spire's central control room, the nerve center of the entire integration process. Access was restricted to senior liaisons and architect-level personnel. My name was not on that list. For this, we needed more than just clearance. We needed a distraction, something big enough to pull the Spire's primary security focus away from the control room for the few precious minutes I would need. This was Echo's part of the plan. Her methods were direct. She had spent cycles acquiring and modifying a small number of confluence-grade plasma charges from the black market. weapons that were psionically coded and theoretically impossible for a non-architect to arm. But Echo's people had found a workaround, a brutal, high-risk method of overloading the psionic lock. "I am going to give them something to look at," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion as she laid out the 3 small, silver spheres on the tactical map. "I'll detonate these at 3 separate energy substations on the far side of the spire. The explosions won't be catastrophic, but they'll cause a significant power fluctuation. Security protocols will automatically divert all available resources to contain the threat and stabilize the power grid. It should give you the window you need." I stared at the silver spheres. It was an act of terrorism, a direct violation of the peaceful, non-violent resistance I thought we were waging. "There are people working in those substations," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Civilians. Harmonized staff." Echo looked at me, her single organic eye cold as the void. "They are not people, Kalen. They are components of a machine that is digesting our species. They are the teeth in the gears. Do not make the mistake of mourning the tools of your enemy. When a man is held in a cage, he does not weep for the bars he is forced to break." Her brutal logic was a chilling reflection of the architect's own. A perfect, dark symmetry. I was caught between 2 absolutes, 2 different flavors of merciless fanaticism. But then I thought of Ilara's empty eyes, and I knew which side I had to choose. The night of the cascade was thick with an unnatural stillness. I walked the corridors of the spire, the memory core hidden in a false compartment in my datapad, a bomb of pure emotion ticking silently in my hand. I felt strangely calm, the internal storm having given way to a cold, clear sense of purpose. I reached the antechamber to the central control room, my heart a slow, steady drum. Inside, 2 harmonized guards stood sentinel, their faces placid, their movements economical. I would never get past them. I took a deep breath and opened a private channel to Jorik. "It's a no-go. 2 guards. I can't get in." The reply was instant, his voice tight with stress. "Echo is in position. It has to be now. Kalen, there won't be another chance." As he spoke, a low, shuddering tremor ran through the entire spire. The lights flickered, and a distant, muffled boom echoed through the structure. On the far side of the Capitol, 3 pillars of smoke were rising into the serene twilight. The first charge had detonated. The guards in front of me stiffened, their heads turning in unison towards a wall-mounted alert panel that was now flashing a crimson emergency warning. A synthesized voice, calm and unhurried, announced a power fluctuation in Sector Gamma 7 and the automatic deployment of security teams. One of the guards tapped his wrist comm. "Control, this is Sentry 9. We are reading a Level 4 energy event. Do you require our assistance?" The antechamber was silent for a moment. I held my breath. "Negative. Sentry 9. The voice from the comm replied, "The architects are containing the event. Maintain your post. All non-essential personnel are to remain in their designated zones." My window was closing. The distraction wasn't enough. And then, something unexpected happened. Lyron appeared at the far end of the corridor, his stride urgent, his usual serenity replaced by a flicker of something I had never seen in him before alarm. He was heading directly for the control room. He nodded curtly to the guards. "I've been summoned by the architects. There's been a complication with the archival system." The guards stepped aside instantly, granting him access. The massive door to the control room began to slide open. This was it. Not part of the plan. A variable we could never have predicted. It was a moment of pure chaos, and I had to seize it. As Lyran stepped through the doorway, I moved, my body acting on pure instinct. "Lyran, wait!" I called out, my voice pitched with urgency. He turned, his brow furrowed in confusion. In that moment of distraction, I threw my data pad. It wasn't aimed at him, but at the control panel just inside the door. The pad shattered against the console, and a shower of sparks erupted. The door, its closing sequence interrupted by a sudden power surge, froze halfway open. The guards, startled by my sudden, unharmonized action, moved to intercept me, but I didn't resist. I raised my hands in a gesture of surrender, my face a mask of manufactured panic. The power surge. It corrupted my data pad, I exclaimed. I think it might have damaged the door controls. My outburst, the destruction of property, the breach of protocol, it was all so illogical, so contrary to my programming, that it created a moment of pure cognitive dissonance in the guards and in Lyran. They were trying to process the impossible, and in that moment, as they were focused on me, a small, dark figure slipped through the half-open doorway behind them, silent as a shadow. Jorik. He had left his console, a desperate, last-minute gamble. He held the true memory core in his hand. He had used my distraction to get himself inside. Lyran's eyes widened as he saw the intruder, his carefully constructed calm finally shattering. "Treason," he cried, his voice no longer a melodic hum, but a raw, human shout, but it was too late. Jorik slammed the memory core into the primary data port. The lights in the spire flickered violently, and a new sound began to fill the air. It wasn't the calm, synthesized voice of the confluence. It was the defiant, glorious, terrible sound of a forgotten symphony, blasting through the spire's internal comms. The first note in a song of rebellion that would either awaken a species or condemn them all to silence. The first note of the symphony was a physical blow. It wasn't just sound, it was a wave of pure, unfiltered emotion that crashed through the sterile silence of the spire. It was the sound of 1,000 years of human joy and sorrow, triumph and despair, condensed into a single, defiant chord. For a moment, everything froze. The guards, their hands reaching for me, stopped mid-motion, their placid faces contorting with a confusion so profound it was almost comical. Lyran stared at the data port where Jorik had slammed the memory core, his mouth agape, the word treason dying on his lips. Then, the cascade began. It wasn't a violent explosion, but an implosion of the senses. The symphony swelled, its chaotic, passionate melody overriding the calm, ambient frequencies of the harmony. The light panels in the control room flickered, not randomly, but in time with the music, displaying fragmented images from the memory core, a child's laughter, a lover's tear-streaked face, the stark, brutal beauty of a Terran sunrise over a war-torn city. The air itself seemed to thicken, saturated with the raw data of a forgotten history. Jorik, his face illuminated by the flickering console, let out a triumphant, ragged laugh. "It's in! It's spreading!" He yelled over the music. "They can't stop it now." The effect on the harmonized was immediate and catastrophic. The two guards collapsed, not unconscious, but catatonic, their bodies twitching. their eyes wide and unseeing as a lifetime of suppressed emotion flooded their minds. They were drowning in the beautiful, terrible mess of being human. Lyron stumbled back, clutching his head, a low moan escaping his lips. His face, once a mask of serene logic, was now a canvas of raw, conflicting emotions. I saw flickers of fear, rage, and a deep, soul-shattering grief cross his features in a matter of seconds. The harmony, the psychological cage he had lived in his entire life, was being torn apart from the inside. "Kalen, what have you done?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Broken, he looked at me, and, for the first time, I saw not a diplomat, not a product of the confluence, but a man in agony. Before I could answer, the room was flooded with a blinding silver light. 5 architects materialized in the center of the room, their liquid metal forms shimmering with a controlled, cold fury. The symphony faltered, the images on the panels dissolving into static as the architects exerted their will, their psionic power a crushing weight that buckled my knees. The harmony was fighting back. The dissonance is contained, one of them projected, its voice a chorus of perfectly modulated tones that cut through the chaos like a blade. The corrupted nodes will be purged. The traitors will be unmade. Jorik, snarling like a cornered animal, pulled a small, wicked-looking device from his belt, a neural scrambler, a desperate, last-ditch weapon. He aimed it at the lead architect, but he never had a chance to fire. A tendril of silver shot out, faster than the eye could follow, and wrapped around his wrist. The device clattered to the floor. Another tendril wrapped around his throat, lifting him into the air. He struggled, his face turning a deep purple, his legs kicking uselessly. Echo's voice crackled over my hidden comm, a frantic, desperate shout. "Kalen, get out, my charges only bought you minutes. Their enforcers are everywhere." But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, watching Jorik die, watching our desperate gamble fail. The symphony was gone, replaced by the oppressive, humming silence of the architect's control. We had fired our only shot, and it hadn't been enough. The architects were not just masters of psychology, they were masters of the physical world. Their control over energy and matter absolute. But as the life began to fade from York's eyes, something broke inside me. It was the last vestige of the old logical Kalen, the part of me that still believed in limits, in the impossible. What replaced it was pure, unadulterated rage, the primal, animal fury of a creature watching its packmate be destroyed. I didn't think. I acted. I launched myself at the architect, holding Yorick, my fists beating uselessly against its shimmering, liquid form. It was like punching water. The architect didn't even acknowledge me, its focus entirely on extinguishing the life of the man who had dared to corrupt its perfect system. And then Lyron moved. With a guttural scream that was torn from the depths of his newly awakened soul, he threw himself at the architect's back. He wasn't attacking it. He was embracing it, his arms wrapping around its silver torso. For a split second, the architect was distracted, its psionic control wavering as it tried to process the utterly illogical act of a harmonized being initiating physical contact, an act of such profound intimacy and aggression. In that fraction of a second, Jorik, with his last ounce of strength, bit down hard. There was a faint click. A small LED on his belt pouch flashed green. The architect holding him seemed to realize the danger, its form rippling with alarm. It flung Yorik's body across the room and tried to disentangle itself from Lyron, But it was too late. Jorik's body hit the far wall, and a low-frequency pulse emanated from his pouch. Not an explosion, but a wave of pure electromagnetic energy. It was a dead man's switch. A final fuck you to the empire that had stolen his family's soul. The pulse was designed to do one thing: fry any active psionic field in a 10-meter radius. The 5 architects convulsed, their shimmering, liquid forms destabilized, flickering like faulty holograms. The crushing psionic pressure in the room vanished. The architect holding Lyran solidified, its silver skin hardening into a dull, lead-like substance before it shattered into a million pieces. A cascade of inert dust and fractured crystal. The other 4 collapsed, their forms melting into inert puddles on the floor. In the sudden, ringing silence, I stared at the scene, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. We had killed them. We had killed 5 architects. Lyran lay on the floor, gasping, his body trembling from the psionic backlash. Jorik was a broken heap against the far wall, his face frozen in a final, defiant grin. The memory core was still plugged into the console, and to my astonishment, a single green light was blinking steadily. The upload had completed in the chaos. I dragged Lyran to his feet. He was disoriented, his eyes wide with a terrifying, newfound clarity. The music, he stammered. The faces. I remembered. He looked at his hands as if they were alien things. They lied. All of it. I lie. The dissonance cascade had worked, not as we had intended, not as a wave, but as a seed planted in the mind of one man, and that man had just saved my life. We have to go, I said, my voice hoarse. Now. I grabbed the memory core, pulling it from the port, and started dragging Lyran towards the door. But as we reached the corridor, we saw that Echo's warning had been an understatement. The spire was in lockdown. Heavy blast doors had sealed the corridors, and patrolling the halls were not the serene, harmonized guards, but the architect's true enforcers, the phalanx. They were hulking, bipedal constructs of black, crystalline armor, their movements silent and lethally precise. They were a nightmare of old Earth's wars made manifest, the iron fist inside the confluence's velvet glove. We were trapped, 2 fugitives in the heart of the enemy's fortress. With the galaxy's greatest crime in our possession, we found a temporary hiding place in a narrow service duct, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt circuitry from the dead man's switch. Lyran had fallen into a shocked silence, his mind clearly struggling to rebuild itself from the rubble of his old reality. I checked my comm. It was dead. The EMP having fried it along with the architects. We were alone, cut off from Echo and the others. I looked at the memory core in my hand, the small device that held the soul of my species. Jorik was dead. Echo was likely captured or killed. The cascade had been contained. It seemed, for all our sacrifice, that we had failed. But then, a faint sound reached us through the ventilation system. It was distant, barely audible over the hum of the spire's life support, but it was unmistakable. Someone, somewhere deep in the city, was singing. It was a broken, wavering melody, the sound of a voice unused to passion, but the tune was one I recognized from Lena's archives. It was an old Terran lullaby, the one the mother had sung to her child. The seed had not been contained. The seed had been planted. And somewhere in the silent, perfect city of our captors, a single, defiant flower had begun to bloom. That single, wavering voice in the darkness was the only proof that York's sacrifice had not been in vain. It was a flicker of hope so fragile it felt like a hallucination, but it was enough. It cut through the despair that had begun to settle in my bones and forged it into a cold, sharp resolve. We were not dead yet. I looked at Lyran, who was huddled in the corner of the service duct, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his awakening. The serene, logical diplomat was gone, and in his place was a man adrift on a terrifying, new ocean of feeling. He was experiencing 1,000 years of suppressed human history in a matter of hours, and the storm was breaking him. I knew I couldn't leave him, not just because he had saved my life, but because he was the first fruit of our desperate harvest. He was living proof that the harmony could be broken. "Lyran," I said, my voice low and urgent, "we have to move. They'll be sweeping this entire level, conduit by conduit." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, raw vulnerability. "Where can we go? The spire is sealed. The phalanx are everywhere." He was right. A frontal escape was impossible. But I still had one advantage. I was a ghost in their system. My biometric and psionic signatures were still those of a loyal, harmonized official. The phalanx were hunters, but they were hunting for anomalies, for the dissonant signals of Echo and her team. They weren't looking for me, my mind. Now free of the harmony's placid logic and fueled by a desperate, adrenaline-sharped clarity, raced through the schematics of the spire I had studied for cycles. There was one place they would never expect us to go, a place that was both the heart of their lie and our only potential escape route, the bioarchival chamber. It was the sterile, silent mausoleum where the metabolic misfires, the hollowed-out bodies of beings like my sister, were stored for study. It was a place of death and failure, and security there was focused on containment, not intrusion. More importantly, it was connected to the spire's primary waste disposal system, a network of high-speed conduits that jettisoned biological refuse and inert matter into the incinerators at the city's lowest levels. It was a disgusting, desperate, and utterly insane plan. Getting there was a nightmare of stealth and timing. We moved through the guts of the spire, a world of humming machinery and shadowy maintenance shafts, the distant, rhythmic thud of the phalanx patrols a constant, terrifying drumbeat. Lyran was a liability at first, his movements clumsy, his breathing ragged. But as we moved, something began to change in him. The flood of raw emotion, which had at first paralyzed him, began to coalesce into a single, powerful force anger, a cold, quiet fury at the architects of his stolen life. His movements became more focused, his eyes gaining a hard, sharp edge. He was adapting, the dormant, predator instincts of his species coming online for the first time. We reached the archival antechamber, a gleaming, white space that smelled of antiseptic and cold storage. My biometric signature granted us access. The inner chamber was a vast, circular room, its walls lined with thousands of glowing, crystalline pods. Inside each pod, suspended in a translucent gel, was a body, a core, its crystalline form inert, alumina, its gaseous essence now just a swirl of dull, Lifeless particles. And there, in a row marked Terran 7, I saw her, Alara. Her face was as perfect and as empty as I remembered. A beautiful, hollow doll in a collector's case. The grief hit me with the force of a physical blow, and, for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Lyran put a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "We do this for them. Kaelin," he said, his voice low and hard. "We make it mean something." I found the access panel for the disposal conduit, my fingers flying across the controls. I rerouted the system, programming it to jettison an empty cryogenic storage unit, a container just large enough for 2 people, not into the incinerator, but into a parallel maintenance channel that bypassed it. As the massive tube slid into place, a new sound reached us, the high-pitched whine of phalanx targeting sensors. They had found us. The blast door to the antechamber began to glow red as a plasma cutter sliced through it from the other side. "Go!" I yelled, pushing Lyran towards the open container. He scrambled inside, and I prepared to follow. But as I turned, my eyes fell on Alara's pod. I couldn't leave her here. I couldn't leave her to be a specimen in their museum of lies. In a moment of pure, illogical, human madness, I smashed the emergency release on her pod. The crystalline case hissed open, and her inert body, cold and lifeless, slumped into my arms. "Kaelin, what are you doing?" Lyran screamed from inside the container. "We don't have time." The blast door exploded inward, and 3 phalanx enforcers stormed into the room, their weapons raised. I dragged Ilara's body with me, a dead weight that seemed to anchor me to this place of ghosts. I threw her into the container with Lyran and dove in after her just as a volley of plasma fire scorched the wall where I had been standing. I slammed the emergency hatch shut, and with a gut-wrenching lurch, the container was jettisoned into the dark, roaring chaos of the disposal conduit. We were free, but our victory felt like a funeral. We landed in the city's grimy underbelly, a world of dripping pipes and mountains of refuse, the pristine, silver spires of the upper world a distant, mocking dream. We had the memory core. We had a witness in Lyran, and I had my sister's body, a constant, tragic reminder of the price of the Confluence's peace. In the days that followed, we found the shattered remnants of the dissonance. Echo had survived, scarred and burned, but alive, her fury now forged into an unbreakable resolve. A handful of her people had made it out, but the song I had heard was gone. The cascade had been a flash, a brief, beautiful moment of rebellion that had been brutally suppressed. The Confluence had locked down the Harmony network, purging the corrupted data and reinforcing their psychological control. To the wider galaxy, the events on Cygnus X1 were reported as a terrorist attack by a small band of primitive human extremists. The lie held. We had failed to awaken the galaxy. Or so we thought. It was Lena, who we found hiding in a refugee camp in the lower levels, who showed us the truth. She had been monitoring the deep network, the ghost channels between worlds. "You didn't fail," she said, her old eyes burning with a fierce light as she showed us the data streams. "You didn't start a fire. You planted a seed, the memory core. In the brief moments it was active, hadn't just broadcast to Cygnus X1. Jorik, in his final act of defiance, had piggybacked the signal onto an outgoing diplomatic transmission, a single compressed packet of data that had shot out into the galaxy before the architects could stop it. It was a message in a bottle, a whisper of truth cast into an ocean of lies. And somewhere, on other worlds, among other species who had been harmonized, the song was being heard. We saw reports of spontaneous emotional dissonances among the core. We saw surveillance footage of a Lumina artist creating a chaotic, passionate sculpture of light for the first time in centuries. We heard a garbled transmission from a distant human labor colony, a fragment of a Terran folk song being sung in defiance. The revolution had not been a single, glorious explosion. It was a slow, creeping dawn. We were no longer just a handful of rebels. We were the keepers of the spark, the curators of a memory that was now, finally, beginning to remember itself across the stars. Our war was not over. It had just begun. I stood with Echo, Lyran, and the last of the dissonance on the loading ramp of a stolen freighter, the memory core clutched tightly in my hand. In the ship's small medical bay, Ilara's body lay in cryostasis. I knew I couldn't bring her back, but I also knew I could not let her be forgotten. She was our ghost, our reason, our first martyr. We were a pathetic, broken little family, born of grief and rebellion, and we were humanity's last, best hope. As the freighter lifted off, leaving the gleaming, sterile cage of Cygnus X1 behind, I looked out at the star-dusted infinity of the galaxy. The confluence was vast, its power absolute, its lie all-encompassing. They had erased our past and stolen our future, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had taught us the meaning of peace, and in doing so, they had shown us exactly what it was worth fighting for. And we were just getting started.